Christian Eschebest and his staff are preparing to get back to work. France has started to ease coronavirus restrictions put in place in mid-March. And while a reopening date for restaurants is yet to be announced, Christian knows business won't be the same as before the pandemic.
I will do everything I can to bring life back to my restaurant. I am fully aware we will have 40%, 50% less business.
But he isn't worried about bankruptcy. A government program has allowed him to put staff on reduced hours and covers up to 84% of their lost salaries, on the condition they're not laid off.
Am I afraid of the future? No, because we hope customers will come back. Things will be complicated, but I think we're in a business that is able to bounce back fairly quickly.
Their peers in Greece aren't as optimistic. Andreas Yikas is worried he won't be able to cover the cost of the crisis in the long term. The Greek government, like others in Europe, has put in place measures to help businesses. But he says companies forced to close shouldn't have to pay the full amount of their utility bills and other fixed costs.
These should all be frozen and not be deferred for payment later. The government will pile all these on me again later. I will have to pay the current costs at that time, plus all those that were generated during the time we were shut down.
The services sector generates 2/3 of the Eurozone's GDP, but widespread shutdowns have led to an economic collapse. The Eurozone economy contracted at a record rate of 3.8% in the first quarter, wiping out 3 years of economic growth. Consumer price increases slowed to 0.4% in April, compared with 0.7% the previous month. The drop was driven by a collapse in energy prices. And unemployment rose to 7.4% in March, up from 7.3% in February. Economists warn second quarter figures will be even worse. The European Central Bank has promised to buy $1.2 trillion of debt this year to help cushion the blow, and it kept the door open to even more relief.
Growth scenarios produced by ECB staff suggest that euro area GDP could fall by between 5 and 12% this year, depending crucially on the duration of the containment measures and the success of policies to mitigate the economic consequences for businesses and workers.
European governments know economic contraction is the price they have to pay to fight the pandemic. But the longer the outbreak lasts, the harder it gets for businesses on government-funded life support to survive. Sibel Karkush, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, Fredrik Eriksson joins us now from Brussels. He's the director of the European Centre for International Political Economy. Welcome to Money Talks, Fredrik. Now, a 3.8% contraction across the Eurozone in the first quarter, the steepest fall on record. Was this in line with your expectations, or could it have been worse?
No, I think this was in line with expectations. And as you said in the program, this is the first quarter result, which means that lockdown measures hadn't been in place for more than 2, sometimes 3 weeks. So we didn't expect sort of a big contraction in Q1. The big thing is going to come now in quarter 2. I mean, we've had the entirety of April when the economy's been locked down. They've been locked down for part of May. We don't expect that a gradual reopening will mean that business is going to, or the business activity is going to return to any degree of normality during quarter 2. So we're talking here about, as Christine Lagarde said in your story, that we may have a contraction of GDP for the second quarter, which is going to be double digit.
Yes, and we are seeing economies across Europe begin to reopen after the various lockdowns. Would that not be enough to perhaps cushion the blow for the second quarter growth figures?
Well, it's going to cushion the blow a bit, but not by much. We're not talking about sort of a fast process of reopening. We're beginning now by opening schools. And after we've done that, we're going to open up shops a little bit more. But even if we do that, even if sort of retailers, hairdressers can open up, we don't expect a lot of customers to come there, because it's going to take a while for people, for customers, for for staff at workplaces to adjust to the fact that they're going to live together with the virus now in the future, and we sort of need to have precautions and protocols for how we're going to behave, and that's probably going to take us through the summer before we get to a point where industries and where normal services operate perhaps at 70% of what they had before the crisis started.
Yes, you mentioned the ECB chief Christine Lagarde. She was initially criticised for perhaps not doing enough at the outset of this outbreak across Europe, but the ECB has since announced various measures, including what appears to be an unlimited bond buying program, agreeing to buy government and company debt across the Eurozone during this pandemic. Do you think Christine Lagarde is doing enough to I guess, cushion the blow from the economic impact of this virus?
Well, for the time being, the ECB is certainly doing what it should do, and it's also providing the liquidity and that governments now need and that corporations now need in order to operate during this lockdown. We'll have to see how long this is going to last, because we already saw initially that the ECB itself is not in its entirety convinced that this is the right way to go forward. Christine Lagarde said initially sort of that it's not the purpose of the European central banks to make sure that spreads between different government bonds are kept low. And we saw from minutes that came out from the last meeting of the sort of full set of decision makers at the ECB that there are many central bank governors in Europe that have huge hesitations about how far the ECB is going to go when it comes to buying up junk on the corporate debt market and buying government bonds for countries that almost technically, we could say, are in bankruptcy.
Okay, Friedrich Eriksson from the European Centre for International Political Economy. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.